Institutes of Health, Dr. Emails obtained by BuzzFeed News show the director of the National Institutes of Health, Dr. Francis Collins, appeared to dismiss the theory that the virus might have leaked from a lab in Wuhan, China. An email written to Dr. Anthony Fauci, dated April 2020, had the subject line, "Conspiracy Gains Momentum." And it included a link to an article that referenced comments about the lab leak theory and reporting by our own special report anchor Bret Baier. Now fast forward to a Senate hearing last week where Dr. Collins said that the lab leak theory is a possibility.
I will say I think the most likely mechanism by which SARS-CoV-2 arose was a natural process of transfer from an animal to humans. But it is certainly possible that other options might have occurred, including a possible lab leak. We just don't have evidence to be able to say what that likelihood is.
So joining me now is Dr. Francis Collins, director of the National Institutes of Health. Good to have you back, doctor. Thank you for being here. So I want to drill down on...
Nice to be with you, Martha.
Nice to have you. So I want to drill down on this with you. So why in April of 2020 would you say that references to a lab leak were part of a conspiracy theory?
Well, I never thought, Martha, that an email only reported by the subject line would become a topic for Fox News afternoon programming. But here we are. Let me try to clarify. There were a lot of conspiracy theories and other ideas floating around at that point. One of them was that actually SARS-CoV-2 had been a bioengineered bioweapon created on purpose by human intervention by the Wuhan Institute of Virology. That doesn't fit with what we know about this particular viral genome. Another was that NIH had somehow been complicit in the generation of this dangerous virus, and I can tell you categorically that did not happen. But then there was this other idea that maybe it was an accident, a lab leak, that the Institute had been studying this virus, that it happened somehow in nature and it got loose. I never rejected that one, although there was no evidence to support it. So when we talk about what happened, let's try to clarify the difference between those various statements or various options. Some of them are pretty outrageous. Some of them are still plausible. But even the lab leak hypothesis, you know, Carl Sagan had this famous statement that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Okay. So let's talk about whether
this pandemic has killed...
Okay. I just want to dig into this a little bit because this is why people have raised these questions. You know, at this point, there's still no evidence that it came from a zoonotic source, that it came from a natural source has not been proven at this point. Then you have the other. Were you aware that there were 3 scientists that were ill with COVID-like symptoms in November of 2019 at the Wuhan lab?
I was aware that there might have been some individuals at the lab who were ill. I didn't know the number was 3.
Okay, but when you heard that, why didn't that cause you to say, you know, we really need to find out exactly what these people had in November of 2019 and why they visited the hospital?
Oh, I certainly have been willing to say that well before that particular number of 3 information came forward. We knew back last year that there had been some possibility of laboratory workers who had fallen ill, most likely with the flu or some other benign illness, but it was a fact that was known out there. Let's just be clear here, Martha. I don't think we know what happened in Wuhan. It is possible there was a lab leak, but again, that's an extraordinary claim. What we need then is to have an evidence-based, expert-driven, open investigation.
Agrees on that now, but the fact of the matter is that both you and Dr. Fauci really poked a lot of holes. You know, any conspiracy theory that came from Senator Cotton or President Trump was shot down as just not being scientific and something that should be rejected. Now, I want to, do you disagree with that?
I disagree with that. Outrageous conspiracy theories that we're all getting blurred together here, that this has been a bioengineered bioweapon,
but let me
and that
just point
really
out,
doesn't
Dr. Collins,
add
that
up.
we also don't know 100% that some version of that is not the case. There are a couple of different programs that were funded by the NIH that raise these questions. And if you have, tell me what your reaction is to this. Back in 2015, there was a $10 million grant for work that was done by Dr. Barrick of UNC and Dr. Zhengli of the Wuhan lab. They were building synthetic strains of SARS that, quote, resisted all vaccines and immunotherapy. Then you have Dr. Daszak of the EcoHealth Alliance. He was doing bat viruses combined with genes that had spike proteins that had, quote, affinities for human cells. They were untreatable, this virus, and resistant to vaccines. So why was that work being done, and why was it being done in conjunction with NIH-funded scientists?
We're the National Institutes of Health. We're the largest supporter of medical research in the world. We knew that bat-driven coronaviruses had caused already two major scares as far as the pandemic, SARS and MERS. It would have been irresponsible for us not to try to understand what else might be lurking out there. But I categorically deny that NIH, in its grant funding and a subcontract to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, was permitted to do anything that would have created a virus that would have been increased in its transmissibility or its virulence for humans. I categorically deny that, and I'm a bit unhappy that people keep repeating those claims when they're simply not true.
So,
I'm a little disturbed, Martha. We're spending all this time on this issue, and here we are today. We should be talking about how to put COVID-19 behind us, not going back to January 2020. We'll get the answers. Right now, we don't have any new data.
But Doctor,
it absolutely matters.
We have been told up and down that anybody who thinks that this was not a zoonotic virus is part of some conspiracy theory, doesn't know what they're talking about. Right now, I'm not a scientist, so I give you that. That's why I wanted to raise these questions with you. Because when I read these things, that they're working on things that resist all vaccines and immunotherapy, right? It makes me wonder why we would be allowing this kind of research, and why, with the history of lab leaks that have led to other viruses getting out, why we wouldn't have right away said, pressured the folks in China at this lab to say, we need to understand what happened here, instead of just assuming that it was coming from an animal. And it's my understanding that the Chinese, and I don't know what you can trust and what you can't trust, but that they have not found, they've tested 80,000 species. They can't find one animal that carried COVID-19. So why is there so much basis given to that part of the story and not the lab leak part of the story?
Again, I think the most likely explanation is still a natural transmission.
Why
Let's
do you
be
think
fair
that?
here. Because that's always been the case with other coronaviruses. With SARS, it turned out to be a civet cat. With MERS, it was a camel. With Ebola, we still don't know what the intermediate host was. It's not easy to figure this out. So just on a historical basis, that's the most likely path that was traveled. And again, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. To claim that the lab was responsible, we need to know that. But I don't think anybody, you or any of the others who are commenting, should jump to the conclusion that that's the most likely explanation right now. We do not know that. It might be, but we do not know.
I'm not jumping to any conclusions. I think the biggest question that people have right now is why it seems like you and Dr. Fauci both jumped to the conclusion very early on that any explanation of this that could be a lab leak was something that we were all waved off of. Why were we waved off of that so early on when we're now being told that we don't know and that we should do a thorough investigation of exactly that?
Martha, I deny that you were waved off of that by me. I would say you were waved off of some more outrageous conspiracy theories that had really no categorical sense to them. But the idea of a lab leak was never anything that I thought was impossible. I just want to say that right clearly now.
Okay, Dr. Collins, I thank you for being here. We all agree that it's very important to put COVID behind us. You and I have talked about vaccines, we've talked about research, but now more and more, I think it's really important that we drill down, because we don't want this to happen again. And we have seen other viruses that came from lab leaks. I think that is also something that wasn't widely discussed at the beginning of this. So I think there are a lot of questions about the relationships and why we weren't asking tougher questions early on from our medical professionals.
I agree we need to get to the bottom of this, but gosh, you and I just spent a whole bunch of minutes here talking about some issue that we need to get an answer to, and meanwhile people are still dying from COVID-19, and we didn't even talk about the ways to get to an end to this with vaccines. So please, could we have a bit more of the focus on how we're going to save lives while we're talking about how this all started? We need both of those, don't we?
We have put a lot of time into that, and I think the questions about the origins of this are not going away, Dr. Collins, and I think we need to make sure that we do everything we can to protect our national security when it comes to these labs and any potential funding that might have gone to those labs. So we are going to continue to ask those questions, and I thank you for coming on several times. This was the focus today, and we'll continue to talk about other things as we go forward. Dr. Collins, I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And I'm an internist and